Alright, how's it going, y'all? So today we are talking Synology drives. Do you need them? Is this the Synology? And everything in between. And we're going to be going over it for somebody who's not super familiar with what's going on. So we're going to start with the beginning, what's been going on, all the way to what are these drives, are they value, are they horrible, and what brands need them. So we're going to be covering the entire thing. So we will be having timestamps down in the description below to go over all of this. And to start, let's go over a little bit of history here. So about 3 years ago, Synology created their own drives. Synology doesn't actually manufacture these drives. I'd be very worried if they did. They actually just partnered with Toshiba. So Toshiba makes the drives and they're just standard Toshiba drives with a custom Synology firmware on there that in theory allows them to better, well, one, do firmware updates, and two, in theory allows them to have better communication, get better performance than they would with a standard drive. Do I see that as a huge value add? Not really, but we're going to be talking about that all later on. So they were making these Synology branded drives, and then what happened is they started requiring your higher end models to use them. And this is a soft requirement where it's just annoying, but you don't actually lose any functionality. And by the higher end models, it's the XS Plus units or drives with more than 8 bays. That is where it stands today. So any unit that's got XS in it or can store more than 8 drives, starting at 12 drives is the minimum. So 12 or more drives in the head unit require Synology drives. And for a long time, they were very, very, very expensive. Like 1.5 to 2 times in some cases the cost of their competitors. And especially coming from Synology, who started out with consumers, and even for businesses, their real selling point in the beginning was, we were going to get you a better NAS for a lot less money. This was a huge shock and a huge detraction from how Synology has been operating. Now that we've had about 3 years, I feel like we can go back and talk about it and kind of understand where we're at and give you, the end user, the understanding for, hey, if I'm buying a model, do I need to buy the drives, and everything in between. Okay, so now with all that out of the way, let's start by talking about how do you tell which models need them. And by need them, I'm going to refer to the fact that if you put non-Synology drives in the unit, it is going to have an orange indicator for the end of time unless you do some hacks that I generally don't recommend. And this is different than recommend them. I'm going to kind of put that in a separate class because the ones that I'm going to say recommend them, you click once through a dialog box and everything works totally fine and support won't care. So those are going to be our two distinctions, and we're really going to be focusing on the higher end units that actually will show orange. And I'm actually going to show that on the RS2423 that requires the Synology drives. So I'm going to grab my laptop and we're going to check it on out. Okay, and so as I said at the beginning of this video, there are 2 criteria for if a Synology is going to require drives, and if either one of them are true, it's going to require the Synology branded drives. There's some nuance there where technically there's an extended compatibility list that has 4 terabyte versions of another drive, but really it's Synology drives. So we're just going to focus just on the Synology drives. Okay, so the 2 criteria are 1, does it have more than 8 bays? So does it have 12 bays or more? And 2, is it greater than a plus model? So this includes XS and XS Plus models, and any of their FS series, all are going to be in that tier. So if you get a NAS that has 8 bays or less and is just a plus model, then you should not need them. This is especially interesting because right now, Synology will be coming out with the DS1825 Plus and hopefully the RS1225 Plus. Hopefully in this next calendar year. These are both models that should be the highest end NAS you can buy that does not require Synology drives. And so in the next few months when this comes out, it will be very interesting to see if this still holds true. But everything I've heard from Synology and also seen on these lists is that technically, if they do not change the line they've drawn in the sand, the 1825 Plus and the 1225 Plus both should not require Synology drives. And now the way we tell is we go to a unit that does require them. So we can go into this 2423 Plus. This is actually what I've got back there that we're going to be showing. And as you can tell, it has 12 bays. So even though it is just a plus model, it has 12 bays, so it should require the drives. And the way we can tell that is to come in here. So we come on down to the storage section, and this is the note we look for right here. If it says this, basically the use of non-validated components may limit certain functionality. This is the indicator that, hey, it is going to complain at you constantly if you do not have only Synology drives in there. So now let's go ahead and look at a different model that does not require it, so we can see the exact same option, the exact same note, but for a unit that does not require them. So this right here is the note that you would see if you do not have to have Synology drives. So even if your compatibility list for this specific unit does not include the drive you're putting in, you will still be able to build a volume and not have any issues. So it'll complain at you the very first time. It'll say, hey, this is not on the compatibility list, but you'll click a box that says, okay, I don't care. And then it'll never mention it again. Versus with the 2423 Plus, if you do that, it'll always show warning. And we're gonna go ahead and show that in a minute here. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and just pull up my 2423 Plus, and I have some Synology drives in there, and I also have some of these Ironwolf SSDs that are not on the compatibility list. And so we're going to look at and see exactly what it's like if you are somebody who runs one of these servers. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and pull up Storage Manager. And as you can see, I have SSDs right here, and spot the non-Synology SSD. All right, so drive 8, that is our Ironwolf SSD, and you can see it is showing up as unverified. This would not show up as unverified in red in a unit that did not require Synology drives. The next thing we're going to go ahead and do is see the real annoyance, and that is to create a new storage pool. And I'm just going to create a quick little RAID 1 with that drive and a Synology drive. This is our warning we would get, that unverified drive 8. So this warning you would get on either system if it's not on the compatibility list, but if it doesn't require the Synology drives, as I showed earlier, then it will only give you this warning and never again. So this is where our volume shows as at risk. So it immediately is warning us, hey, storage pool is at risk. And now our overall health of the system has gone from green, all happy, to warning orange. Is there a way to change the compatibility list by SSHing in and editing those files? Yes. And if you want to look online, you can find details on how to do that. I tend not to recommend to do things like that, mostly just because I would much rather deal with this annoying warning and just understand that, hey, it's not a big deal because I know it, than have something go wrong and there's a weird update that now bricks my system. Have I seen that happen? No. And people have been updating their systems for a long time with those compatibility lists, and there have not been any issues. But for me, I tend not to do it for clients just because I don't know what the downsides could possibly be, whereas I know this is only at the service level. So this right here is the error you will get. You will essentially always show warning, and the drive will show up as red, even though your entire system is perfectly healthy and you don't lose any functionality whatsoever. And so that is exactly what you deal with if you install non-Synology drives in a device that requires them. You don't lose any functionality. All you get is a constant warning. And as we can see, we still get all of our smart info right here, and you still get your same data. So you don't lose any key information of drives. You still get your smart data, and they will still be able to do tests and everything. The only thing that happens is at the surface UI level, it shows up as unverified, and the overall system health will be warning. So now you as the end consumer have the option. And personally, I deploy them quite often without Synology branded drives and just tell the end user, hey, listen, it is a cost-benefit analysis for you and your business. Synology says they will not offer support for you if you run into an issue. I'll be honest with you, I've seen them provide support for people who have non-Synology drives if it's clearly not a drive issue, but your mileage may vary. The other thing is just the massive cost savings. So if you're looking at drives that are over 16 terabytes, it can be a huge cost savings to buy the Iron Wolf drives or even your WD Reds, basically any other NAS manufactured drive versus the Synology drives. Specifically, if you are over that 16 terabyte mark. If you're under that 16 terabyte mark, you can actually buy the Synology new Plus series that I'm going to talk about towards the end of this that are actually a pretty good value in some cases and really bridges the gap and makes this not as big of a deal for a lot of cases. But if you're one of those people who is looking to get, honestly, one of my favorite units, the RS3622XS Plus, because you want to store 200 terabytes of data in a single chassis, and you want to be able to put 12, 20 terabyte hard drives in this unit to give yourself a 200 terabyte RAID 6 volume, then it's going to be really, really, really expensive if you go with the Synology branded drives. And that leads to the end question. How annoying is it going to be for you to look at that warning? And you will also get drive emails about once a month that says, warning, these might have issues whenever you do updates. And you lose out on automatic firmware updates. But with all that, in a lot of cases, especially if you are a smaller video production house and you need a ton of space but don't necessarily have a huge IT budget, it can make a lot of sense to just go with the unit and deal with the warning. Honestly, I end up recommending it quite often just because it's not that big of a deal to some people, especially those people who are running a lean IT budget and you're not a big old enterprise making sure every single box is perfectly checked and there's just one person dealing with it. So it really becomes a cost benefit analysis. Is the absence of the big old warning worth a few $1,000s to you? And you also do get that better support. And in theory, if there's something that goes wrong, Synology should be able to figure out what it is because it's their drives in their chassis. All right, so that was a full overview on pros and cons of buying the Synology drives, what warnings you're going to get, which units require it, and everything like that. The next thing I want to talk about is the new Plus series, because I think it really bridges the gap and mitigates a lot of these issues for certain people. So Synology, about a year ago now, came out with their new Plus series. So we go into their storage drives. They now have these Plus series SATA hard drives that go up to 16 terabytes of space versus the Enterprise series that go all the way up to 20 terabyte hard drives. The thing is, if we look at BH Photo, we can see that the 16 terabyte Plus series are actually not that far off on regular hard drives. If we pull up like a equivalent Iron Wolf, in this case, the Synology hard drives are actually coming in cheaper. Now, the Iron Wolf drives do fluctuate in price all the time, but in this specific snapshot in time when I happen to be filming, I think this might be the first time I've seen it, the Synology Plus series drives actually came in as cheaper than the Iron Wolf drives. But the Iron Wolf drives do fluctuate in price a lot more, and sometimes you can catch them on a really good sale and save a bunch of money, but the Synology drives do not as much. But just from this right here, you can see that if you're looking at that 16 terabyte level, the Synology hard drives are not a bad deal. You have drives that should be fully compatible and have no issues because Synology is controlling both ends of it. They also have that ability to do the firmware update. I don't see huge value add in that, but some people do. So there is that value for those 16 terabyte Plus series. And it really does mitigate the issue for a lot of people where you're going to have to spend a ton more money to get the Synology drives versus the Iron Wolves because now there's this Plus series. Now I will say the Plus series are not compatible with all NAS units. Specifically your XS Plus rack mount units often are not compatible with these. So you really need to check, and they've made it even extra confusing because if you try to put this in the highest end units, even the highest end SATA units, it still might show as incompatible, which is one thing that really annoyed me about them when they came out. But if we look at how much cheaper these are than the comparable HAT 5300s, they are not that far off from being half the price. They are about 2/3 the price for the same size drive. That is the reason why it is so hard to recommend these Synology drives. So when you're having to deal with the really expensive HAT 5300s and the enterprise hard drives, that is where they get super, super expensive. And that's why the Plus series has come in and actually been not a bad value add. It's also the reason why when we only had these hard drives to pick from, there was so much backlash against this move because there were units that regular small businesses would be using, really those video production houses who need that massive amount of space, and would be spending twice as much money in some cases to get an equivalent hard drive, especially if you look at these 20 terabyte drives. So that is why there was so much initial backlash when they did not have the Plus series. It is still very annoying, but now that there is the Plus series and they have kept it pretty well to those large units, I don't think it's as big of a deal for consumers as we all initially thought. So in a case like this, where your Plus series hard drives are coming in at the same price or cheaper than the Iron Wolves, I would probably say, yeah, go for them for end consumers, even if you're using a DS1522 Plus. That doesn't require them at all, assuming you get one of these Plus model units that happens to be cheaper than your alternatives. So they do have those features, and you do just guarantee that support. And now that the Plus series are out, they actually might interest some people. All right, so I hope this video kind of summed up everything about Synology required drives. If your unit has 8 bays or fewer and is a Plus series or less, then you should not require Synology drives, and any hard drive you put in there, assuming it works, will essentially just work and complain once and then never again. For everybody else, there is that cost-benefit analysis to deploying your NAS with the other drives. And there are pros and cons, and it really is going to depend on your exact use case and your exact needs. If you have any other questions, put those down in the comments below. And if you want to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below. All right, have a good one. Bye.